August 19, 1944. Inside the Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, General Alfred Jodl studied the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the Allied supply routes, stretching more than 400 miles from the beaches of Normandy to General George S. Patton's fast-moving Third Army. The Americans had outpaced their own logistics. Patton, they believed, would be forced to stop within days, perhaps even hours. No army could advance at such speed without fuel. From his position at Hitler's Wolf's Lair, Jodl reviewed what every German general knew from experience. A single armored division required about 150,000 gallons of fuel per day during an offensive. The U.S. forces were now 400 miles from their supply depots. By any logical calculation, Patton's advance would soon halt. That pause would give the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Seine River and hold their lines until winter. What Jodl did not know was that, only 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 trucks were roaring eastward through the night. Their headlights cut through the darkness as they carried more than 12,000 tons of supplies every 24 hours. This was the Red Ball Express, a bold and unprecedented logistical operation that German military science had never imagined possible. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks, expected to stand idle, would crash into German defenses along the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be liberated. Within a month, American troops would reach the German border. The best minds in the Wehrmacht were about to learn a new lesson, that American logistics, powered by determination and industrial scale, could redefine modern warfare. Behind this miracle were 23,000 truck drivers, 3/4 of whom were African-American soldiers. They turned a simple one-way road network into the most efficient supply chain in military history. The German High Command's confidence in an American logistical failure came from long military experience and observation. Germany had pioneered the Blitzkrieg, revolutionizing combined arms warfare, and they understood better than anyone the tyranny of supply lines. Their own offensives had often faltered not because of enemy resistance but because supplies failed to keep pace. On the vast Russian front, it was not Soviet counterattacks that stopped the German army, but distance and exhaustion. Trucks broke down on muddy, rutted roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of Germany's transport, could not match the speed of advancing panzer units. Different railway gauges across Europe left supply depots stranded hundreds of miles from the front. In July 1944, General Heinrich von Littwitz, who would later command the 47th Panzer Corps, wrote, "The Americans will soon face the same impossible logistics we faced in Russia. Their mechanization will become a weakness. Machines need fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History tells us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence had carefully tracked U.S. fuel consumption. A single Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on paved roads, even less across open terrain. An infantry division required about 700 tons of fuel daily, while an armored division consumed roughly 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions stretched across a 60-mile front. The arithmetic seemed unbreakable. 12,000 tons of fuel per day, transported over 400 miles from the beaches, through damaged roads and bridges that German engineers had destroyed during their retreat. On August 26, General Siegfried Westphal, who would soon serve as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, recorded his own calculation. Even if the Americans had an unlimited number of trucks, which they do not, perfect roads, which they do not, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still could not maintain Patton's advance for more than 48 hours. The laws of physics cannot be broken, not even by American industry. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on August 25, 1944, inside a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Corps faced a room full of doubtful officers. Their calculations were clear. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any military force in history, advancing at a pace that far exceeded any logistical plan. The traditional supply methods, rail transport, scheduled convoys, and distribution from depot to depot, had collapsed under pressure. "Gentlemen," Ayres declared, "we will create a one-way highway system from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every truck will run 20 hours out of every 24. No stops except for fuel or emergencies. We will move no less than 12,500 tons of supplies each day." The name for this new operation came from a railroad term, Red Ball, referred to express freight shipments given absolute priority. The Red Ball Express would follow the same principle: total priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical plan challenged every convention of German military thinking. It required 2 parallel one-way routes, one for loaded trucks heading east and one for empty vehicles returning west. Operations would run around the clock with headlights blazing, no blackout conditions, no pauses. It was a no-stop policy, except for fuel or mechanical failure. Convoys would be spaced 5 minutes apart to maintain an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Mobile repair units were placed every 50 miles, and Army checkpoints removed any vehicle traveling under 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commander of the advanced section of the communications zone, reviewed the projected numbers. "We need 140 truck companies, a minimum of 5,958 vehicles, and at least 90% operational readiness," he said. That is beyond anything described in a logistics manual. Yet within just 36 hours, the impossible became reality. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 39th 16th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, affectionately known as Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells, bound for Patton's forward positions near Melun, 300 miles to the east. The makeup of the Red Ball Express would have stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who eventually operated the route, roughly 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated U.S. Army. These men, who were not allowed to dine in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, now played a critical role in fueling the advance of one of America's most celebrated generals. Within hours, the drivers of the Red Ball Express created their own unique culture. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, and non-stop from Detroit to Berlin. They established their own traffic rules. Slow trucks were ordered off the road. Vehicles with engine trouble were pushed into ditches. Any truck moving under 20 miles per hour was treated as an obstacle. By August 28, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented. Crews from the 116th Reconnaissance Group radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route, continuous columns of vehicles, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline, estimated 1,000 trucks per hour. The Americans have abandoned all military precautions. This defied every principle of German military doctrine. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous convoys presented perfect artillery targets. Minimal spacing meant a single breakdown could halt hundreds of vehicles. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned. On August 30, Lieutenant General Edgar Feuschinger, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions. His report to Army Group B headquarters expressed growing alarm. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles move 30 seconds apart, day and night, without pause. They do not hide, they do not disperse, and they follow no rules we recognize. This is not military science. It is mass production applied to war." What the Germans failed to grasp was that American logistics worked by entirely different principles. While German doctrine emphasized concealment, the Americans relied on overwhelming volume. Where German officers sought to preserve equipment, American planners assumed that up to 20% of trucks would break down, and designed their system to absorb those losses. Where German logistics depended on rigid procedure, the Americans succeeded through constant adaptation. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express shattered every German calculation of what was possible in logistics. During its first week, from August 25 to August 31, 1944, the operation delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, averaging 12,848 tons per day. The round-trip distance covered was 686 miles, with 5,958 trucks completing an average of 1.5 runs each day. The operation itself consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel daily. German logistics experts, after obtaining these figures from captured American documents, dismissed them as propaganda. Yet the numbers were real, and they were still increasing. By September 5, the Red Ball Express had reached a tempo that German supply officers could scarcely imagine. The Wehrmacht still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of its transport. Meanwhile, American convoys were departing every 5 minutes from their western terminus, each averaging 67 trucks. Every vehicle carried a standard 5-ton load, though overloading to 7 tons was common. It took an average of 14 hours to complete the 350-mile journey one way, with 2-hour turnarounds at each end. At any given moment, more than 5,000 vehicles were in constant motion along the route. The Red Ball Express became a living laboratory of innovation as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science had long considered unsolvable. When trucks broke down about 1,800 each day, mobile maintenance units performed repairs directly on the road. Mechanics developed an efficient triage system, 15 minutes to repair the vehicle or push it off the route. Parts were stripped from trucks deemed beyond repair, and engines were replaced within 45 minutes using portable cranes. When designated Red Ball routes became congested, drivers created alternate paths. They requisitioned French buses to carry personnel, freeing more trucks for freight. They salvaged captured German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and put them back into service. Around destroyed bridges, they built temporary bypasses using rubble from bombed buildings as makeshift roadbeds. The Germans, witnessing this seemingly chaotic system that somehow produced perfect order, were unable to comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized meticulous planning, fixed maintenance schedules, and procedural discipline. The Americans ignored those principles completely, yet their system accelerated instead of collapsing. The most astonishing revelation to German observers came from the American management of fuel. The Red Ball Express alone consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline every day just to keep itself running, a quantity greater than what many German armies received for all purposes combined. Yet the Americans never ran short. They had built a parallel miracle, Operation Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean. These pipelines, laid beneath the English Channel, carried fuel directly from Britain to France. By September 1944, gasoline was flowing through these hidden lines that German intelligence had not even detected. Along the Red Ball route, forward fuel depots were spaced every 25 miles, and tanker trucks operated an independent distribution network that ensured no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. Major General Walter Warlimont, analyzing aerial reconnaissance photographs, summarized the astonishment within the German High Command. The Americans possess fuel depots larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline than we allocate to all our panzer divisions combined. This is not war as we understand it. This is industrial abundance turned into warfare. The Red Ball Express did not merely sustain Patton's advance, it multiplied its speed. German military doctrine had long held that an armored division could maintain an advance of 20 to 30 miles a day under ideal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles a day for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles during the morning phase of operations, halted briefly at noon to refuel and rearm from waiting Red Ball trucks, then pressed forward another 32 miles that same afternoon. A 67-mile advance in a single day shattered German defensive planning, which had been based on a maximum Allied advance of no more than 30 miles per day. General Heinz Guderian, reviewing reports from East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles a day for an entire week. Mechanical breakdowns alone would prevent it. This must be propaganda, or a misidentification, he remarked. Yet intercepted American radio traffic confirmed the reports. What alarmed German commanders even more was the realization that the Americans were broadcasting their positions openly, without encryption, completely confident that their speed made them untouchable. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had completed its first comprehensive report on the Red Ball Express. The implications were devastating for the Wehrmacht's planning. Every assumption about American military capability had to be reconsidered. The report contained observations that directly challenged the principles of German military science. The Americans, it noted, wasted vehicles at a staggering rate, abandoning trucks that broke down rather than repairing them. Drivers used stimulants to stay awake for days, disregarding traditional personnel management rules. There was no camouflage discipline, making the system theoretically vulnerable to air attack, an attack that never came. Mechanical failure rates reached 30% daily, but they were absorbed through sheer redundancy. Their fuel consumption, the report stated, would bankrupt any European army. Field Marshal Walter Model's response captured the growing despair of the German command. If these reports are accurate, he wrote, we are not fighting a superior army but a superior civilization. They do not hide because they do not fear us. They waste resources because their resources are limitless. This cannot be defeated by military tactics. The drivers of the Red Ball Express paid a physical price invisible to the German observers. Many drove for 72 hours at a time, pushed to exhaustion and hallucination by fatigue and benzodrine tablets. Accidents claimed the lives of 300 drivers during the operation. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, and burst into flames when overheated engines ignited. Yet their morale remained unshaken. These men, most of them African-American soldiers denied equality at home, understood that they were making history. With every mile they drove, and every ton they delivered, they disproved the racial doctrines of Adolf Hitler and embodied the industrial power of democracy. Captured German officers later confirmed the psychological and operational impact of the Red Ball Express. Colonel Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You broke every rule, wasting fuel, abandoning vehicles, driving without restraint, and yet you succeeded through sheer scale. You have industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological toll on the German army was immense. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear the rumble of American trucks through the night, an endless growl of engines, an endless stream of supplies. They had only 3 rifle cartridges each, while the Americans brought millions. That sound alone became a weapon of war. The trucks themselves astonished German engineers. The GMC CKW 2.5-ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, represented the peak of mass production efficiency. By the end of the war, General Motors had produced more than 500,000 of these vehicles, more trucks than the entire German army possessed of all types combined. Each truck featured innovations the Germans had not yet adopted. Four-wheel drive was standard, not optional. Automatic tire inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed the vehicle to ford 30 inches of water, engines capable of running on low-grade fuel without modification, and heaters that actually worked in winter. Even more remarkable was the American philosophy of maintenance. Where German mechanics rebuilt engines, the Americans replaced them. Where the Germans distributed spare parts, the Americans scrapped entire trucks for minor issues. The Germans relied on master craftsmen. The Americans trained thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs quickly and effectively. As the front advanced eastward, the Red Ball Express adapted with a speed that amazed German planners, who were accustomed to taking weeks to prepare for even minor logistical changes. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, the Americans created entirely new extensions of the Red Ball Express overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to rail transfer points, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, and the ABC line from Antwerp through Brussels to Charleroi. Each new route became operational within 48 hours of its conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar undertakings. The Americans simply painted new signs, assigned trucks, and began moving. The dominance of African-American drivers within the Red Ball Express created a profound contradiction for Nazi racial theorists. German ideology claimed that black soldiers were inferior, incapable of technical skill or initiative, yet these very drivers performed logistical feats that the German army could not match. The African-American soldiers were fully aware of the irony. They knew what Nazi propaganda said about them, and that knowledge drove them to work even harder. Every mile they drove was living proof that Hitler was wrong. They fought racism not with weapons but with steering wheels, defeating Nazi ideology through excellence and determination. Some captured German soldiers, forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers, saw their worldview collapse when they worked under African-American sergeants. These sergeants calculated load distributions faster than German engineers, spoke English more fluently than German interpreters, and treated prisoners with fairness despite everything Nazi propaganda had claimed about racial hatred. For the first time, those prisoners saw the moral strength behind the system they were fighting against. The Red Ball Express demanded an infrastructure that the Germans had believed impossible to create in active combat zones. American engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, established 15 major fuel depots, organized 26 maintenance stations, and constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while operations were ongoing. The bridge at Pont de l'Arc had been deliberately destroyed by German engineers to cripple American logistics. Wehrmacht planners estimated it would take at least 6 weeks to replace. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles along hastily cleared side roads. German engineers watched the American construction methods with disbelief. There were no lengthy planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, only immediate decisive action. They built faster than the Germans could destroy, creating an infrastructure that seemed to rise overnight across the French countryside. One particular achievement of the Red Ball Express left German artillery officers in disbelief. The sheer rate of ammunition supply exceeded even their most optimistic theoretical estimates. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German force had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of the fortifications around Metz in September 1944, the 19 Corps artillery fired 100,000 shells in a single 24-hour period. The Red Ball Express delivered every round plus an additional 20% reserve. German artillery units defending Metz received a ration of only 50 shells per gun per day. The contrast was staggering. American gunners fired continuously for hours, while German analysts calculated that such barrages would require 50 ammunition trucks arriving every hour. The Red Ball Express provided them without pause. The operation consumed vehicles at a pace that would have crippled any other army. By the end of September, mechanical wear had reached extreme levels. The average lifespan of a truck was 10,000 miles, compared to the normal 30,000. Daily breakdown rates reached 30% of all vehicles. Each week, 500 engines were replaced, and 10,000 tires were used. More than 5,000 trucks in total were destroyed or abandoned. Yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Shipments arriving weekly at French ports brought hundreds of new trucks, while replacement drivers were trained in just 2 days and immediately integrated into convoys. German analysts calculated that the Americans destroyed more trucks each week than the Wehrmacht possessed in all of France, yet their transport capacity increased rather than declined. They had achieved what the Germans believed impossible: logistics faster than consumption. The French civilians who lived along the Red Ball route witnessed a level of abundance unseen after years of occupation and scarcity. The psychological impact on the population was immediate and profound.
Red Ball drivers, especially African-American soldiers, often shared their rations with the local people despite official regulations. At every stop, children gathered beside the roads, and drivers handed out chocolate, cigarettes, and soap. The contrast with the German occupation could not have been sharper. The Americans gave freely what the Germans had distributed with strict control. German intelligence reports noted the effect on morale and propaganda. The French population now believes American victory is inevitable. They take the endless convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased by 400% along the Red Ball routes. Civilians who once tolerated our presence now oppose it actively.
In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Red Ball system began to strain under the distance. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were exhausted, trucks were deteriorating, and German intelligence noted signs of overextension. On September 8, General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported, "American supply lines show signs of collapse. The intervals between convoys have lengthened from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has dropped. This is our opportunity." But once again, American adaptability defied German expectations. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express had reorganized itself completely. Intermediate transfer depots were established, cutting individual runs to 350 miles. A system of rotating driver shifts was introduced. Forward maintenance bases were built closer to the front, and the number of assigned trucks was doubled. By September 12, the total tonnage delivered had actually increased. What could have been a logistical breakdown instead became a display of flexibility and strength. Complementing the Red Ball Express, the Americans launched another logistical innovation that the Germans had considered impossible: large-scale aerial resupply. C-47 transport planes began delivering critical supplies directly to frontline units, each carrying 3 tons of cargo. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers recorded 900 transport flights in a single day, carrying a total of 2,700 tons of supplies by air. At its peak, the German Luftwaffe had managed to fly only 300 tons per day into Stalingrad, and that had been considered a maximum effort. The Americans treated aircraft as flying trucks, unconcerned with fighter escorts or fuel limitations. They accepted losses and simply overwhelmed the problem through scale. The Wehrmacht could not compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles completely opposite to the rigid hierarchy of the German military. Junior officers made decisions that in the Wehrmacht, only generals would have been allowed to make. Sergeants directed operations larger in scale than those typically managed by German colonels. This decentralized structure puzzled German observers. American logistics functioned without clear centralized control. Every lieutenant acted as if he were a general, every sergeant as if he were a colonel. Chaos should have followed. Yet instead the Americans achieved an efficiency that the rigid command system of the Wehrmacht could never match. By October 1944, expanding railway connections began to reduce the need for the Red Ball Express. What had been planned as a 10-day operation lasted 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of supplies over 122 million ton miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected grimly on what they had witnessed. Field Marshal Walter Model wrote in his final report, "We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or aircraft. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express had proven a profound truth of modern warfare. In the 20th century, logistics was strategy. The transition from truck convoys to rail transport was itself a remarkable achievement. American railroad engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French track while the Red Ball convoys were still running. They laid new lines faster than German demolition teams could destroy them, often reusing captured German rail equipment. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express defied every German assumption about logistical capability. 82 days of continuous operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 122 million ton miles traveled, an average of 5,958 trucks, peaking at 7,000, 23,000 drivers employed, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily, 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered to Patton alone, 15 million rations transported, and 135,000 tons of medical supplies distributed. When captured German officers later reviewed these figures in prison, they admitted that they had based their estimates of American logistics on European standards. They had taken their own best performance, tripled it, and assumed that represented the American maximum. They had been wrong by a factor of 10. Beyond tonnage and distance, the Red Ball Express achieved something even deeper. It shattered the German belief in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers who had once viewed Americans as mechanically dependent and lacking discipline now saw those same Americans accomplish logistical feats through determination and industrial power. German prisoners stood silently behind barbed wire, counting the Red Ball trucks rolling past. Some of them wept.
they understood what those endless convoys meant. The Americans not only supplied their armies, they wasted more than the Germans could produce. With every passing truck, they watched their worldview collapse one vehicle at a time. The Red Ball Express triggered an unexpected transformation within the American army itself. The success of the operation depended heavily on African-American soldiersmen who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, and forbidden from combat roles. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower visited the Red Ball operations in September 1944, he witnessed this contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded the moment. The general stood watching the black drivers who had been working 20-hour shifts. He said, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantryman. We have a lot to reconsider." Their success created pressure for integration, contributing directly to the desegregation of the U.S. Army 3 years later. In France, these African-American soldiers proved what they had always known, that given the tools and the opportunity, they could match anyone in performance and courage. The Red Ball Express was their battle, and they had won it decisively. German racial theorists struggled to explain this contradiction. The SS publications on racial science simply stopped mentioning American logistics. The evidence was too obvious to deny, and too damaging to acknowledge. German military engineers later studied the Red Ball Express extensively after the war. The lessons they learned reshaped global military logistics. Volume could overcome inefficiency, mechanical redundancy eliminated weakness, decentralization accelerated performance, standardization multiplied capacity, and human endurance had limits, but those limits were far higher than anyone had believed. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determines strategy, not the other way around." The Americans understood this truth. We learned it too late.
Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, countless personal stories of heroism emerged. Stories that the Germans found impossible to understand within their rigid military framework. These accounts were later verified through military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove for 48 consecutive hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division near Cambrai. He fell asleep at the wheel 3 times, but continued driving after being awakened by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning the vehicle, as regulations required, he drove the burning truck 2 miles to a field hospital and jumped clear just as the flames reached the cab. The supplies he delivered saved wounded soldiers from both armies. Multiplied by thousands of similar acts, these stories revealed the essence of American military culture: individual initiative, calculated risk-taking, and a commitment to accomplishing the mission rather than simply following orders. By the end of 1944, the Germans desperately tried to create their own version of the Red Ball Express. During the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Greif included a plan to use captured American trucks to form a German supply route. The attempt failed almost immediately. German drivers could not maintain American speeds. German mechanics could not repair American vehicles quickly enough. German fuel reserves could not sustain the demand. At its core, the Wehrmacht could not replicate the American attitude toward resources and abundance. The colonel commanding the operation summarized the failure in his final report. "We captured 50 American trucks. Within 1 week, 30 were out of service. The Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." Winter from 1944 to 1945 brought the final trial for the Red Ball Express. Hail, snow, and ice should have stopped any wheeled transport. German doctrine claimed wheeled logistics were impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express kept moving. Drivers changed tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and pressed on. Average speed fell from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but deliveries continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys pushing through blizzards that had halted panzer formations. The Americans had built a logistics system that operated despite weather, terrain, or enemy action. It was not graceful or efficient by German measures, but it could not be stopped. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were asked to study the Red Ball Express for the historical record. Their conclusions were unanimous and humbling for German pride. General of Infantry Friedrich Schulz summarized it this way: "The Red Ball Express represented a kind of war we had never imagined. The Americans created a temporary civilization of thousands of people, thousands of vehicles, and millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed an army and then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They built superior temporary systems in days." The most pointed analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its basic limitation, which was logistics. The Americans solved it with industrial redundancy that we believed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply route, but a river of material that swept over our forces. The Red Ball Express cost the United States about $100 million in 1944, including destroyed vehicles, fuel consumed, damaged roads, and French claims. German staff officers, trained to manage scarcity, found the figure hard to grasp. Americans judged it a modest price. The operation helped capture 400,000 German soldiers, liberate France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shorten the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost the United States $250 million. The Red Ball Express effectively paid for itself in a single day saved. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, the European theater logistics chief, put it plainly. We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to break the German army in France. In any earlier war, that would have been catastrophic loss. In America's industrial war, it was an acceptable cost. One unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on civilian logistics after the war. Thousands of drivers returned home with practical experience running the largest transport network in the world. These veterans founded trucking companies, helped design the federal highway system, and built the modern American logistics industry. Firms such as Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways grew with leaders who applied military methods to commerce. They had learned in France that volume can beat inefficiency, speed can beat perfection, and if you keep trucks running around the clock, you can move the world. Military historians widely recognize the Red Ball Express as the defining logistics campaign of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance would have halted, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and German forces might have successfully established their winter defensive line. The operation reinforced a central principle of American military doctrine, that logistics outweighed tactics in determining victory. While German officers studied Clausewitz and practiced battlefield maneuvers, the Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, the ability to sustain movement was more decisive than brilliance in tactics. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander in the West, received a detailed intelligence report on the Red Ball Express. After hours of review, he called his staff together. "Gentlemen," he said, "we are facing a problem that cannot be solved by military means. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance meaningless. Our entire strategy depends on the limits of advance imposed by logistics. That limit no longer exists. They have changed the nature of war, and we are fighting its final version." His operations officer, Colonel Hans Speidel, suggested using the remaining Luftwaffe aircraft to disrupt the Red Ball routes. Von Rundstedt's reply revealed his understanding of the situation. "With what will we stop them? They have 6,000 trucks. Even if we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they will replace them in a week. We would have to destroy 200 a day, just to keep pace with their production. We do not have 200 aircraft in total." Behind the statistics were the everyday human stories that exposed the American character to German observers. Drivers who had gone 3 days without sleep refused to rest, fearing their trucks might not survive another run. Mechanics worked through freezing rain to keep the convoys moving. Teenagers lied about their age to drive supply trucks across war-torn France. Multiplied across the campaign, these small stories formed a legend that demoralized German forces. The Americans were not the weak industrial soldiers that propaganda had described. They drove themselves harder than the German horsemen. Yet they did so willingly, not out of fear, but from determination. That made them far more dangerous than any German doctrine had imagined. The Red Ball Express became an unintended but powerful instrument of psychological warfare. German troops could hear the truck engines at night, endless mechanical lines that never seemed to stop. The sound itself became a weapon. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that sapped morale as much as actual supply deliveries. The Americans soon recognized this psychological effect and began broadcasting recorded truck noises toward German lines. Even when no convoys were present, German soldiers continued to report hearing them, convinced the convoys were real. It was a vivid demonstration of how the Red Ball Express, beyond its logistical triumph, had also broken the spirit of an army. In November 1944, as the railway network was gradually restored, the Red Ball Express was officially shut down. Yet its methods had permanently transformed military logistics. The concept of continuous, large-scale, wasteful but effective resupply became a foundation of American military doctrine. Its final innovation was speed of demobilization. This massive operation, 23,000 personnel, 6,000 vehicles, and hundreds of facilities were dismantled within 72 hours. The troops were reassigned, the vehicles redistributed, and the roads returned to civilian use. The Germans, who required months to organize smaller operations and years to dissolve them, could not comprehend this efficiency. The Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945,
Many cited the Red Ball Express as clear proof that further resistance was pointless. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel declared during interrogation, "When we understood your logistical capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply your armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon for which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most capable commanders, was asked what had impressed him most about the American forces. His answer was simple: "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized the entire productive power of your society. We were fighting your factories as much as your soldiers." The final statistics of the Red Ball Express told the story of America's industrial war. Total tonnage delivered, 420,193 tons. Total distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Trucks in use, an average of 5,958 daily, peaking at 7,000. Drivers employed, 23,000. Days of operation, 82. Fuel consumed, 57 million gallons. Tires worn out, 180,000. Trucks destroyed, more than 5,000. Total cost, $100 million. German divisions defeated through supply superiority, 47. Estimated days the war was shortened, 180. These figures tell a story far beyond the battlefield. They mark the moment when war itself changed, when industrial capacity became more decisive than tactical skill, and when logistics began to define strategy rather than serve it.
In 1994, to mark the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized an operation often overshadowed by combat, yet equally vital to the Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke with pride of their role in proving that America's industrial strength and human determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, mechanical failure, and weather that halted tanks. Most were African American soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, and often unacknowledged in wartime, yet they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics was not a supporting effort. It was the main effort. This campaign proved that an industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that no authoritarian efficiency could ever match. The German generals who once mocked American logistics fell silent before 6,000 trucks hauling 12,500 tons of supplies each day, across 700 miles of liberated French countryside. They had assumed the Americans would follow European precedent, conserving resources, advancing carefully. Instead, the Americans unleashed a logistical tidal wave that drowned the German army in Allied abundance. Its success did not come from military genius but from qualities the Germans never understood: industrial excess, mechanical skill, improvisation, and above all the initiative of individual soldiers who made decisions on their own decisions, that in the Wehrmacht required a field marshal's approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the principal beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, expressed his deep gratitude. "The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for defeating Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical breakdowns, through weather that stopped tanks. Without them the Third Army could not have moved. Without movement we could not have won." Most of them were black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. Yet they fought and won as surely as any rifleman. History must record that truth. That truth remains the lasting legacy of the Red Ball Express. 23,000 drivers, most of them African American, commanding 6,000 trucks along one-way highways, achieved what German military science had declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should have allowed, maintained a pace beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with more trucks would defeat the side with better tactics. German generals had mocked American logistics as wasteful, undisciplined, and unsustainable. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to the armies supplied by the Red Ball Express. They had finally learned that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial surplus had crushed military brilliance, and that logistics had become strategy. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoes through military history. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belonged not to the bravest soldiers or the most gifted generals, but to the nation that could deliver the most supplies, the farthest, and the fastest. The German officers who had mocked American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves a place among the great military campaigns of history, not because it was elegant or efficient, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton moving, forced the Germans into retreat, and proved that in modern war, convoys mattered more than armored columns. The highways of France still bear the traces of the Red Ball Express, deep tire ruts from overloaded trucks, hastily repaired bridges, and rusting vehicles left by the roadside. But the greatest monument to the operation is not found in stone or metal. It is the speed of the Allied victory itself. Every day the war was shortened, saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months. In the end, the German generals who once laughed at American logistics learned the costliest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America's voice in that war, the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying both democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down the one-way road to victory. The final word belongs to a German officer whose name has been lost to history, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing on a roadside in Belgium, watching the endless stream of American trucks pass, the captured officer spoke in broken English to his guards. "We prepared for everything, your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How can you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than soldiers?" His answer came every 5 minutes, from exhausted American drivers who were rewriting the rules of war, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had turned logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and the truck into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals stopped laughing only when they understood the truth. By then Patton was already at their gates, supplied, fueled, and unstoppable, powered by the greatest logistical campaign in military history.